The pandemic, climate, migration. These are some of the top issues that the UN Secretary-General discussed with EU leaders at the European Council in Brussels. Issues that can unite us, but that sometimes divide us. In any case, there's a real partnership between the European Union and the United Nations. So it is now with great pleasure that I welcome the Secretary-General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, to the Global Conversation. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on the program. Now, just a few days ago, you were reappointed to a second 5-year term in New York. That basically means two things. Number one, that people are happy with what you do. And two, that you like the job. So tell me, what's going to be the focus of your second term?
I'd say probably the main focus will be the following. We are witnessing the enormous fragility of societies and planet. Pandemic, climate, lawlessness in the cyberspace, even the risks of nuclear proliferation. And the truth is that we need more international cooperation and more multilateral approaches to deal with these problems. But for that, we need to strengthen our multilateral system. And we need to make sure that for some global commons, climate is a good example, health is another example, and preparedness in relation to pandemics, we need to strengthen the multilateral governance mechanisms. Look at WHO.
So the biggest challenge for all of humanity right now is the pandemic. You told the European Parliament that the situation can go either way, break down or break through. What did you mean by that?
Well, it's very simple. If we do not manage to vaccinate everybody everywhere sooner rather than later, and if the virus mutates, and if mutating might at a certain moment make vaccines useless, if we keep the huge inequality between developed countries and developing countries in the recovery projects, we might have a collapse of many aspects of the global economy. On the contrary, if we are able to vaccinate everybody everywhere and you defeat the virus, and at the same time if you address the problems of debt, of liquidity, of developing countries, and guarantee that developing countries can also recover from the pandemic, we might have a breakthrough.
So there are obviously huge gaps in healthcare, in social protection, but I think the most urgent thing is, and you mentioned it, is the vaccine inequality. How can we step up these efforts? You mentioned it, you said we need a global plan, but this is urgent, this is immediate.
We need to double vaccination production capacity, and we need to ensure an equitable distribution of vaccines. That is why I've suggested at the G20 level, for instance, in which all the main countries are, to have an emergency task force of the governments of the countries that produce vaccines or can produce them if there is enough technological support and if licenses are made available and the supply chains are put in place, in order to double that production capacity, dealing with the pharma to make sure that it happens, and at the same time using COVAX to have an equitable distribution of vaccines everywhere.
Another global fragility is the climate. You have commended the European Union for its Green Deal. Now, critics say this is not enough, it's too little, too late. What's your response?
From the point of view of the objectives, Europe is on track with what is needed. Now what we must have is the policies and the measures to transform those objectives into reality. And there is one area of concern. The recovery packages that are being implemented in Europe and everywhere are still putting a lot of money on fossil fuels, are still not doing enough for renewable energy. We are not yet shifting taxation from income to carbon. We are not yet able, even if Europe has announced that it will not be financing more coal power plants in the world, but still there are coal power plants being built in different parts of the world. So, I mean, the targets are okay. We need to make sure that policies implemented guarantee that those targets will be reached. And obviously, we need to do everything to make the rest of the world do the same.
Another topic, one that you have devoted a lot of energy to throughout your career in public life, that is the plight of refugees. Now, the pandemic has made the situation of migrants worse. In your talks with EU leaders, did you get the impression that this is a topic that is going to be tackled in an appropriate way going forward?
I think there is still a long way to go. But one thing for me is obvious. When you have a European Union in which trade is free, in which I can go from Brussels to Copenhagen or from Brussels to Lisbon without showing my passport and without showing my any other and using the same currency, it is clear that it is not possible to look into asylum and into migration on a country-by-country basis. We must have a European approach to asylum and to migration, because if not, competition among countries will make it impossible to manage. And if there is not a European approach to migration and asylum, and if there is not an effective cooperation between Europe and countries of origin and countries of destination, these flows will go on being managed by smugglers and traffics.
I'd like to mention a program where the European Union is the most important partner of the United Nations, and that is the Spotlight Initiative against violence against women. It's a relatively recent program, so tell us about it.
Well, first of all, it's important to say that 1 in each 4 euros that we spend in the UN comes from European taxpayers, and I want to express my gratitude for that. And Europe is today the largest, the Team Europe is the largest humanitarian donor and the largest provider of official development assistance to development. The European Union is supporting, financially supporting a program that we are managing in the UN, the Spotlight Initiative, which aims, as you mentioned, to fight violence against women and girls. And that program is by far the largest program in the world with this objective. Just to give you an example, thanks to this program, 650,000 women victims have been supported all around the world. 84 new laws have been enacted in different countries exactly to protect women and girls in relation to violence. And if one looks at the number of convictions of perpetrators, we have seen an increase of 22%, which means the program covers everything: support to victims, enhancing legislation, acting with the judicial systems, with the police forces, and at the same time sensitizing especially men and boys to make sure that they have a proper approach to masculinity. So it's a wide-ranging set of initiatives that has been very effective in a moment in which, unfortunately, violence against women and girls is increasing.
Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, thank you so much for a great global conversation.
Thank you very much.